Hello class, welcome to our introductory video to Module 4. In this video we'll talk about everything that we did in Module 3 briefly, and then we'll look ahead to see what's going on in this module. First I want to talk about some business items just to get them out of the way. Grading for Module 2 is complete, and you'll be able to find my audio comments and Turnitin on your papers there. So give those a listen. And what else? Grading for Module 3 will be done this week, now that that's wrapped up. And let's just talk about Module 3 for 1 minute. You submitted in the second discussion board section your topics for your papers. Everybody's seemed pretty good. I may have asked you some follow-up questions or some things that need clarification or specification. But overall, everyone's topic is good, and I'm glad everyone is moving along. The one thing that I wanted to mention is that now that you have feedback from your classmates and from me on these topics, you will be in Module 5, completing the prospectus, which is basically an abstract of your paper. Between now and Module 5, I'd like to upload another video, an extra video, that talks about how to write a philosophical paper. A paper in philosophy is very different than other papers that you may have written before, and because the parts are slightly different. They still have a beginning, a middle, and an end, just like everything else, but a short video on some tips and tricks to writing a good philosophical paper will surely help you out, I think, especially in terms of organization and structure. So be on the lookout for that. I'll post it, relatively shortly. I'm hoping to do it this week, if not the beginning of Module 5. So I'll be doing that shortly. But if anybody has any questions on the final project or the final paper, just feel free to email me anytime. I think that everyone's topic is looking in good shape, and the one thing to remember is that it's not a research paper. It's all about arguments and making good ones. So you can certainly research those, but we don't want the paper to be crushed under the weight of statistics and research. So keep it fresh, keep it creative, and keep it logically minded in terms of your argumentation and the claims that you're making within the paper. Okay, so we let's talk about the actual content of Module 3. I was very pleased on the discussion board to see that our discussion about the afterlife was just as fruitful as our prior discussions. If you noticed, there was a few things that I tried to sort of make sure, a few ideas that I tried to work in to my responses to everyone. There's basically 3 ideas that I wanted everyone to sort of, walk away with after that discussion. The first is that, the distinction between things that are rational and non-rational and irrational. So we understand when it's rational to believe something, we have good reason to believe it. Typically there's proof. When something is irrational, it flies in the face of, typically it flies in the face of the evidence, or is just completely insane. Like I gave some examples of irrational things, believing in square circles, or unicorns or something like this. But non-rational things are almost like they don't apply. They're not part of the realm of rationality. They don't belong in logic. Things like belief in God, belief in the afterlife, while they may be arguable and we may have some good reason to believe these things, I wouldn't call them irrational simply because there's no proof. I would instead say they're non-rational. I would say that faith, for example, or belief in the afterlife is something that is entirely possible. It's completely possible. but it's not necessarily a rational belief because we don't have much to support it. But again, it's not an irrational belief because it could be perfectly feasible to imagine that we have um, an immaterial soul that will persist after we die. So there's nothing about that that contains a contradiction or a logical fallacy in that idea. So making the distinction between what's rational and non-rational versus what's rational and irrational can be a valuable tool in philosophy and everywhere else. It sort of puts the idea or the belief in the afterlife in its proper place. It relegates it to a place where we can still argue for it. Things that are irrational can't be argued for, but things that are simply non-rational may become rational if sufficient evidence may present itself. Right now, it's simply a belief, but if we, for example, if we could prove that there is an immaterial soul, perhaps based on the idea that we have free will, and we're not willing to give that idea up, so we argue, where does that originate from? Perhaps it's from an immaterial soul, and where do we get that from? Maybe it's from God. And if we can argue for the existence of God in a rational way, in a logical way, we might be steps closer to talking about, quote unquote, proving the afterlife. Though I think the standard of proof probably would never be met. So, one of the things that I think is important is to make that distinction between different modes of knowledge, and to sort of figure out where non-rational belief falls into the mix. And again, I think we did an excellent job on that discussion board on that topic. The other thing that I wanted to mention was, in addition to the distinction between the rational and non-rational, was just the idea that proof isn't always physical. There was a lot of times on our discussion board where we said, well, yeah, sure, you can believe in the afterlife, but there's no tangible proof, or there's no physical proof. And, there are levels of proof as well, as there are levels of knowledge. And sometimes there's proof that we believe is possible that isn't entirely physical. For example, proof that there can't be an infinite number of things in the world, or an actual infinity cannot exist, or that two parallel lines will never intersect. We can prove these things, but we don't need to appeal to physical proof to prove them. They're entirely logical. So we have to be careful when we're talking about, we know such and such a thing doesn't exist, like the afterlife or God or this or that, because we have no proof. Our standard of proof might have to be of a different sort if we're talking about things that are not typically found in the world, things that aren't tangible. We may have to rely on logical proof and not on physical things. And finally, the third thing was just that while we can still believe in things because of lack of evidence. So we may have lack of evidence of the afterlife, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't believe in it. The same also applies when we have bad evidence. So, if we have a bunch of accounts of people saying they've experienced the afterlife and these near-death experiences, we may reduce those to simple functions of the brain in the final hours of life or in a close to a near-death experience. But that doesn't have much bearing on whether or not the afterlife exists. So bad evidence, or evidence that can be refuted, isn't necessarily going to constitute an argument against the afterlife. And I used an example, I don't remember which example I used in a discussion board, but I can say this now. Imagine that you have good reason to believe that behind a certain door there is a flesh-eating tiger that will rip you to, just rip you to shreds. You believe that there's a 50-50 chance that there's a tiger behind that door, and you have good reason to believe this. Now, if a person walks into that room that you're in and is completely crazy, believes crazy things, thinks that I don't even know what, just the most outrageous things possible, and is totally nuts, and starts to talk to you about the tiger behind the door and really believes the tiger behind the door and tells you for sure there's a tiger behind that door. And because of this person's credibility or lack thereof, you all of a sudden conclude, oh, there must not be a tiger behind that door because this person's crazy and he believes it. Uh, you still have a 50-50 chance of getting your face ripped off when you walk through that door. The key is that that person's credibility or his argument for why there's a tiger behind that door doesn't have any bearing on the reality of whether or not there's a tiger behind that door. So, this line of argumentation should be applied to a lot of things, not just belief in the afterlife, but belief in God in general. A lot of people like Bill Maher and Sigmund Freud, even a far more respected thinker than Bill Maher, has tried to dismiss religion in general because they say, oh, people only believe in religion because it's a crutch. It's an emotional need, a psychological need that we have for completeness and for comfort, and religion fills that role. Therefore, God doesn't exist. That's a leap that you simply can't make. God either exists or doesn't exist, and people's reasons for believing in God are irrelevant to the nature and possibility of his existence. If they want to call religion hogwash because of that, as an institution, whatever, we can talk about that. But it's important to note that one's claims about a metaphysical reality cannot be dependent entirely on, and in fact cannot be dependent at all on people's opinions about that reality. So those are the three major points that I wanted to bring up and have you walk away with from that discussion. So now we're going to be moving into Module 4. Module 4 is a really exciting one. We're talking about consciousness, and we're talking about self-awareness. And we're doing it in the context of a very popular topic, much more popular than when David Chalmers wrote his book about zombies. So zombies are all the rage today, and they're always a fun topic to talk about. So the question asks us to consider whether or not we're really, what is it that separates us from zombies? Imagine there was a zombie that acted like you in every single way. What would make you different? And then another way of asking that question is, are zombies people? And what do we mean by someone being a person? And the underlying assumption here is that self-awareness or self-consciousness is part of that, and is in fact the main part of that, the main part of that. So as we move through the module, keep in mind that your assessment of what makes a human person and not a zombie is not only applicable to zombies, but it's also extremely applicable to the question of artificial intelligence. And this is a big area in the study of philosophy. AI is interesting because the question about whether or not we can create machines that think, or a machine that has emotions, is something that's been debated for a while. And the question of consciousness and self-awareness is obviously extremely relevant to that pursuit. And it's funny, we often make an assumption that might not be entirely valid to make when we talk about artificial intelligence. For example, if somebody said, hey, you could program a computer to say, hey, I'm sad. Maybe it spits out a piece of paper, prints out a piece of paper that says, I'm sad, or it flashes on the screen these words. And it says, oh, I'm happy now, or I'm this, or I'm that. And the computer shows emotions based on certain inputs that you give it. Someone could say, well, it's saying it's sad, but it's not really showing, emotion like humans do. And you say, well, why not? Why isn't it really sad? Well, you say, well, it's just responding to input that it's given from the outside, and it's processing it in a certain way, and it's spitting out an automated response. How do you know it's actually feeling like a human feels? The question, how do you know it feels like a human feels? How do you know it's actually sad as opposed to just spitting out the response? Assumes that what a human is doing when a human says, I'm sad, is fundamentally different than what a computer does, but perhaps it's not. Perhaps we're just complicated machines, organic ones, that receive data and output certain, certain responses based on the data, and you say, well, wait a minute, we're not like computers. We feel. I have emotions. I have self-awareness when I'm sad. And then, of course, the follow-up question is, how do you know a computer doesn't feel the same? It says I'm sad. You've programmed it to do so, but how do you know what it's feeling? We don't know what it's like to be a computer. This is part of the dilemma. Um, so, as you're talking about consciousness and you're talking about, um, you know, the nature of what it means to be a person and to be um, a subjective individual with self-awareness, consider the possibility that what we take to be self-awareness, we automatically assume it doesn't apply to things that we deem non-self-aware, but perhaps they are. And is there a way to test if non-self-aware things are in fact self-aware? How do we know that they're not self-aware? So this is going to be a fun topic, and it's it's really valuable in terms of isolating what it is that makes us human, and isolating what it is about our minds, for example, that make us uh, emotional beings. If anyone has the opportunity, um, a great article or a great subject in philosophy to investigate on your own as it pertains to artificial intelligence and consciousness is the Chinese Room of Searle. Searle was a philosopher, Searle. I think it's John Searle. He had a concept, a thought experiment he used called the Chinese Room, and it's really, really interesting. It has to do with thinking, it has to do with being fooled into thinking that there was an intelligent being inside a room when really there isn't. Um, so it sort of intersects the discussion of whether or not we can truly know or identify another being that's self-aware, or if something can simply display being self-aware, would we be fooled? So there's obviously some connection between that artificial intelligence and the discussion of zombies as well. So that might be fun for you. Anyway, I'll wrap this up. Module 3 grades will be posted, soon this week, and everything up to Module 2 is graded and posted. Let me know, give me a call or email me if you have any further questions on your papers or need an assistance if doing your prospectus. I think you should start working on that, even though it's due in Module 5. It'd be good to start working on it now. And otherwise, I will see you on the discussion board for this week. Good luck.